Hi and welcome to Central Queensland University's short presentation on how to reference journal articles. My name is Julia and I'm here on the Sydney campus. I'm from the Academic Learning Centre and we would like to show you today how you can acknowledge information you found in your journal article, looking firstly at our Harvard referencing style and moving on to APA referencing. So watch both and see how they differ. Alright, let's begin. Today we're not going to focus too much on why you need to reference. This has already been covered in our online academic integrity module, which I am going to assume that you've looked at already. Suffice to say for this presentation that you need to reference to acknowledge the information of other writers. This is part of your research component. So let's look at where you do that within your writing and specifically how you do that, and let's start with Harvard. Okay, where do you need to reference? You need to reference in two places in your writing. We often refer to this as the short and the long of referencing. The short of referencing is in text. So around, that means just before or just after you introduce the idea of that journal article, you will show the name and the year of that writer. And we'll move on to an example in a minute. This is the short form of referencing. This is in-text referencing. Additionally, you need to reference at the end of your writing, which is in your reference list. This is on a new page and it starts with reference list. What you have in text and in your reference list must match. So we have the short form of referencing in text, we have the long form of referencing, your reference list, where every single detail of that journal article can be found, so that as a reader I can locate your source and read it as well. So let's look at using Harvard referencing to reference a journal article. There's three pretty easy steps. Firstly, and you might have done this already, you need to find your journal article. After that, you are going to select the piece of information that you want to use. So that should be a summary of a section of the journal article, or it might be a very specific piece of information, and we'll deal with both after this. Finally, you need to list all those details at the end of your writing in your reference list, and we'll show you how to do this as well. Firstly, let's find a journal article, and you may have done this already. For the purpose of my example right now, I'm going to go to the CQU library database, which I'm sure you did already, and I'm going to find a journal article, and the essay that I need to write today is for finance, and it's about the global financial crisis and banking in Australia. So these are my research terms. Let's see what I can come up with, and we'll see if any journal article is relevant to my question. After all, that's a point of research, to find something, some information that can really assist you to answer your question. So let's see how many journal articles I have. I do have a lot of journal articles here, and there are ways I can limit this search, and I've already done so on the left hand side here. I've limited the search and made it from 2009. So that's something to keep in mind. As you can see, only 87 hits. Now I quite like this journal article here. That sounds relevant. So I might open it and just see how relevant it is to my question. And once I've determined that it is relevant by reading the abstract, and it does seem very relevant to me, I'm going to choose some information from this journal article and I'm going to use it within my essay, as I said, to answer the question within the essay. So let's just find that information that I really like. Yep, and this seems very relevant, so there's some very interesting points. So let's move on and look at what I'm going to do with that information once I've selected it. First thing I'm going to do is go to my CQU Harvard referencing guide. This is a very useful resource. It's available online, and I refer to this in my job. I haven't memorized the whole guide yet, and neither should you. It's really like an encyclopedia or a dictionary that you refer to look up information. And if we scroll right down to the end, you'll see there is a list of sources there. So we know we're using a journal article, so I'm going to move up to where I can locate that here. And so my journal article is here. So this is exactly what my reference should look like. I can see here examples of how to refer to the resource in text. I need, as I mentioned before, a surname and a year, or if I'm going to use more specific information, including a direct quote, I'm going to need name, year, and page. This is the short version of referencing, the in-text referencing. Let's move on to the long version of referencing, and here I have a nice example of exactly how that will look like in my reference list. So I have surname, comma, initials, and surname, comma, initials, year. This is an interesting thing about Harvard referencing, the initial and year being within the same comma. It's worth noting that. The title of my journal article is here. The journal name is in italics following. I have volume and number with VOL, small v, NO, small n, a comma, and all the pages of that journal article. So now that I have my format, I can easily use this format to show you how I'm going to reference and refer to the journal article that I've found. So let's move on. As we mentioned already, in-text referencing is the short form of referencing. So this will be just before or just after you use the idea from this journal article. So once I've selected some information and summarized that or paraphrased that, in other words, made it shorter and or put it into my words, I still need to acknowledge that it wasn't my idea. That was the idea of Allen and Powell, and their journal article was from 2011. So my in-text reference for that journal article I found will look like this. Simply surname and year within a bracket. However, I may want to use the exact words of those authors, in which case I need to add, as you see here, quotation marks. I still then have the author's name and year, and following that I have comma and p.59. That's the page where I found that information. So name, year, and page with a comma between the year and the page. This is when I'm using those exact words from Allen and Powell, those exact words from my writer. You can see on this slide that there are 3 different ways to reference. I strongly encourage you to use all 3 of those ways to avoid your writing being very boring to read and also boring to write. So we see in the first example I have those exact words and then name, year, and page. In the second example, I use a reporting verb. So the authors suggest that, the authors say that, the authors define, the authors contest, contend, and so on. There are many reporting verbs we could use here. You'll notice that when we use the author's name in the sentence, we spell and as a word in full, whereas when we have and in a bracket, it's simply the symbol for and. So this is an important difference. The third example of how I can introduce those ideas from Allen and Powell, my authors, are using according to. I think this is the most favored way of students, according to Brown, according to Zhang, according to Allen and Powell. Please try to vary the way you introduce the ideas from those journal articles with using these 3. Just mention the idea, then the name and year in brackets, and page if it's a direct quote. You can use a reporting verb, suggest that, the authors say that, the authors state that, the authors define. And in the third example, the most popular according to. But do use all 3 of these. Okay, also I mentioned if you're using very specific information, which can be located on one particular part of a page, then that is also worthy of a page number. So this may be data or statistics or something very specific. So very specific information or a direct quote do need this page number after the name and year and also after a comma. Okay, the third step to referencing after the in-text and after I've completed my whole paper, be that an essay or a report, is to have a complete entry in my reference list. Because I've referred to Allen and Powell in text, I must also show them in my reference list. And in my reference list it will look like this. Surname, comma, initial, and surname, comma, initial year. The title of that journal article. Following that, I have the name of the journal. You can see that's in italics, a comma, volume with a small v, dot, vol, dot, small v, no, dot, small n, pp, so the pages, the full pages where that short paper appears in this journal article, pp 57 to 75. So all the pages of that journal article. Don't forget, in text we did use a page number as well. However, we didn't use all these page numbers. I simply used one page number where specific information could be located. So if I am ever summarizing the whole ideas from this journal article, I don't need a page number, simply name and year. So that's pretty much the 3 steps to how to reference a journal article using Harvard referencing. Let's move on now to finding a journal article using APA.